Today's daf we're going to be learning is Yevamot daf Samach. I have a few monthly sponsorships. This month's learning is sponsored by Bracha Rutner in loving memory of her mother, Anna Rutner, Sarah Bat Yom Tov Rachel, on her 5th yahrzeit. She came to the U.S. at a young age. She raised 4 children and was one of the most curious people who really cared about others and prioritized family. This month's learning is sponsored by Yad Binyamin Ladies for the Refuah Shlema of Asher Ben Devorah Feda. Today's daf is sponsored by Belinda Krakey in loving memory of Jeffrey Rhodes, Yehuda Yidel ben Chaim Yerachmiel on his 53rd yahrzeit. He died in 1969 as a young husband of Madeline and father of Belinda. He never saw the legacy he left of his daughters and grandchildren, Jonah, Noah, and Dahlia Krakey. And today's daf is dedicated in memory of those murdered yesterday in a terrorist attack in Elad in Israel, Oren ben Yiftach, Yonatan Chavakuk, and Boaz Gol, and Refuah Shlema for all those injured. Difficult evening. Okay. We're going to get started now at the bottom of Nun Tet Amud Bet. We saw this braita about a kohen gadol, and we're trying to define what is a betula. What is this betula that the kohen gadol needs to marry? What if he himself had relations with her before marriage? So the question is, right, anusat atzmo, mefutat atzmo, in either which way, whether he raped her or whether he seduced her. But a question was asked just before class, how could we have this kohen gadol who seduced a woman or raped a woman be working as a kohen gadol, which is an excellent question that I don't have a good answer to. They don't seem to be addressing this in the Gemara, but it is a very difficult element that is missing here. So in any case, it said here, im nasa nasui. If he married her already, then it sounds like they're saying they stay married. But what we saw, as Rav Huna said in the name of Rav, no, he actually has to divorce her. Nasa nasui means the marriage went through, but he has to divorce her. He can't stay married to her, because she's a betula, right? A woman who had to have relations before marriage, even though it was his betula. So Rabbi Yaakov says, so what's the relevance? That's what we said, is exempt from the knas, the penalty that one's supposed to pay to a woman who you seduced. In the event that you marry her, you don't have to pay the knas. So since he married her, he doesn't have to pay the penalty, but he has to divorce her. So now we're going to disagree. Rav Gavia is going to say, I don't really agree with Rav. And I think there's a problem with what Rav said. As a Rav Gavia, and he basically is going to understand it differently. Amar Rav Gavia mi Beiktil. Amar Lishmata Kamei Rav Ashi. He went from Beiktil and he said, I told Rav Ashi the following. It's actually not Rav Gavia who's going to say this, it's Rav Ashi. Amar Le, Rav Ashi said to him, V'ha Rav, Rabbi Yochanan, Da'amrei Travayu, but wait, how could Rav have said this? Rav himself and Rabbi Yochanan have both said, Bogeret umukat eitz lo yisa. If the woman was beyond the age, remember we said there's an age limit on who he can marry. If she's beyond the 12 years and 12 and a half, basically, or she's a mukat age, she already tore her hymen in some physical accident. Ve'im nasan, right? Lo yisa, he can't marry them. Ve'im nasan nasui. But if he married them, he can stay married to them. That's what nasan nasui meant in that case. Meaning he doesn't have to divorce her. Nobody would think that if he married someone who was too old, or he married someone who was a mukat eitz, who had torn her hymen, nobody would think he would have to divorce her down the road. Why? Well, very simply, because alma sofaliot bogeret tachtav. It's hard to say the kohen gadol can't stay married to this woman if she's 15 years old, let's say, because even if he marries her when she's 12, she's eventually going to become 15. So it's not like there's a problem for a kohen gadol to be with a woman who is right now 15, because any wife he marries is going to eventually get to age 15. And same with a mukat eitz. So faliot mukat eitz tachtav. If he shouldn't marry these women ideally, but once he's married to them, in any case, he would have been married to a woman who's technically a mukat eitz. After he has relations with her the first time, her hymen will be torn. So these two situations are situations that, even though maybe he shouldn't marry them in the first place, but once he's married to them, it's no different than another kohen gadol who's going to end up being married to a woman who's beyond the age of 12 and 6 months and beyond the age and beyond having her hymen torn. So likewise, you could say the exact same thing in this case, because what happened? He had relations with her before marriage, but it was he who had relations with her. So again, hachanami. Likewise here, sofa liot bu'ula tachtav. Once he has relations with her when they're married, any woman who he marries is going to end up having relations with him and be considered retroactively, right, a woman who we have relations with. So what's the difference whether we have relations with this woman before they were married or after they were married? In the end, again, he shouldn't marry her in the first place, but once he marries her, it doesn't make any sense that he should have to divorce her. And therefore, they end with kasha. Now, One could distinguish between those cases, but the Gemara seems to say that this would be in the same category as all the others, and Rav said in the others, he can stay married, and therefore he should be able to stay married to her in this case as well. Okay, now we're going to move on to this machloket that we didn't fully understand yesterday, and now we're going to try to understand it. We're going to have two different explanations. The first one will be rejected. The second one seems to be accepted. Now, if she was raped or seduced by somebody else, right? Seduced basically just means, right, that relationship, right, having relations outside of marriage. So now, lo yisa, he can't marry them. Her, ve'im nasa, what if he did, and they have a child? What's the status of the child? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer havlad halal. Chachamim omrim havlad kasher. So the question is, what's the root of this debate? Normally, a kohen gadol marries an almana, a grusha, divorced, right, a widow, a divorcee, a zona, any of the women he can't marry, the vlad is a halal. So why here is there a machloket, right? Because here it's a little bit different. We'll see. Amar Rav Huna Marav, halacha ke Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So first we have a psikat halacha, both by Rav Huna in the name of Rav, and also v'chen amar Rav Yidel Amarav, halacha ke Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, we paskin that the vlad is a halal. Ikeda Amri. Some people say that the version of what we heard from Rav Huna Marav was a little bit different, and it wasn't coming to say we hold by, it was coming to give the reasons. So Amar Rav Huna Marav, according to the second version, and this is the first attempt at understanding the machloket between them. What's the root of the debate? My time de Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Savar like Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov had like Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, what was Rabbi Eliezer? Remember? Panoi habala pnuya. Remember that? A single man sleeps with a single woman. That woman is a zonah. Once she's in the category of a zonah, then it's obvious. The blood is a halal because zonah is a halal. So that's the first attempt at understanding Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. It seems like the simplest approach. He holds like Rabbi Eliezer. Any woman who had any kind of sexual relationship before marriage is a zonah, and therefore this woman is a zonah. Versus the other opinion, which is, right, Tanakama holds like the other opinions who don't think that that's called a zonah. Right, and we're going to see, like I said, all the five opinions about what all these opinions are about what a zonah is in tomorrow's daf. So now we say, Umi savarla kavate. Wait a minute. You can't say that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov held like Rabbi Eliezer. Why? Vaha kaimala mishnat Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov kavenaki. Ve'ilu baha amarav amarav en alachat ke Rabbi Eliezer. We're going to see tomorrow's daf that they paskined halacha is not like Rabbi Eliezer. And we also know that the Mishnah of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is kavenaki. We've seen this recently, which is it's very clean. Okay, it's unclear how exactly to translate this term, but what it means is his transmissions, all of his traditions that he had about his Mishnayot were very clear and meaning we hold like him. So if we hold like him, then it doesn't make any sense that he would hold like Rabbi Eliezer because we don't hold like Rabbi Eliezer. That would mean we don't hold like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and we know that we generally hold like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So therefore, it doesn't make sense to say this. Okay. So therefore, we're going to have a second attempt at understanding the machloket. Rav Ashi Amal, b'yesh halal mechai ve'aseh kamiflege. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov savar yesh halal mechai ve'aseh, v'Rabbanan savre en halal mechai ve'aseh. What's chai ve'aseh? We've seen this many times, right? Chai ve'aseh means a positive commandment, right? That sort of it's derived that you can't do something from a positive terminology in the Torah. Okay, now we're going to read the psukim and then you'll see. Almana, I'm reading from Vayikra 21, verses 14 and 15. Almana ugrusha v'chalala zonat ela lo yikach. So that's the negative command. Do not take, I'm reading from the end to the beginning, do not take, meaning don't marry, a widow, a divorcee, a chalala, which is the child born of one of these unions, or a zona. You're not allowed to marry any of those. Okay, et ele lo yikach. So these you can't take. Remember this word et ele. In the middle of the verse it says, and these you can't. It sounds like it's separating the first part and the second part. Ki im betula me'amav yikach isha. What can he take? Only a betula from his nation, meaning a virgin, right? And this is where we get all these definitions of what a betula is. So this woman is no longer a betula. Now, is she a divorcee, a widow, a chalala, zona? No, she's none of them. Again, she would only be a zona if we hold by Rabbi Eliezer, but we just said we don't hold by Rabbi Eliezer. So she's not in any of the first categories. She's only included in he needs to marry a betula. That means that's a positive commandment. This is who you're supposed to marry, as opposed to this is who you can't marry. Now, obviously, we derive from there, you can't marry the following people, but that's not a negative commandment in the Torah. So we basically say, according to this, the next thing that's really important is the next verse. The next verse says, "V'lo yechalel zara'o ba'amav, ki ani Hashem HaKadosho." You cannot, right? Don't do all these things because we don't want you to destroy your children. Halal, right? Your children will be halalim. So that means, it sounds like the simple reading is everything in the verse before is a halal, because it seems to be referring to that. So let's read the two opinions. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov saval yesh halal michai ve'as. Right? So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says there is a halal from not keeping this positive commandment. The Rabbanan savre ein halal michai ve'as. Rabbanan savre, they hold only in the negative ones. So if a kohen marries an almana, a grusha, a zona, a halala, then the child will be a halal, but not if it just doesn't fit in the category of a betula. So now we're going to have more in depth how they read these verses. My time of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, dichtiv, it says, almuna grusha v'chalala zonat ela lo yikach ki im betula. As I said, that's the whole verse. And then it says, uchtiv lo yichalel zaro ba'amav. Right? And then it goes on to say, and all these, a child from these will be a halal, basically. Don't do this so that you don't destroy your children. And that's akulu. That refers to the entire previous verse. That seems like the simple reading. The Rabbanan, ele hifsika inyan. Rabbanan saying, no, it said in the middle of the first verse, et ele, these, right? These lo yikach, which means there's a split in the pasuk. It's like section A is negative, section B is positive, section C is lo yichalel. That only refers back to section A, okay? Because the ele made a break, which means that when we talk about a halal, it's only going to refer to the first part. So he views this word ele as a separation between the first two to say the law is not the same for both. And that's why the rabbis think it's not a halal, the child. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, what's he going to do with this word ele? And ele seems to be saying just these and not other things. Ele nida. Ele is to say, no, only in Alman, no, all these will cause halal, including the end of the verse as well. What's not going to be a halal? If a kohen gadol has relations with his wife when she's in nida and they have a child, okay? That is not a halal, even though it's pretty wrong that he did, but that wouldn't create halalim. Right? Halalim come from improper relationship from the beginning, not that she's in a status at this present time of being a nida. So that's what Eila comes to exclude. Now we're going to have two comments on this drasha of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. First, Kaman Azla Hadatanya, according to who does the following bright to go, and it's going to be obvious it's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Me'ele, that's a quote from the verse. Atau sechalal bi'atau sechalal minida. Okay, so that's clear. According to this braita, the Eila is coming to exclude the nida, which is Kiman, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Number two, so now you might wonder, okay, it's pretty obvious why they're saying this, but maybe because in a minute they're going to raise a question on him. So maybe they wanted to show, though, that there's support for his opinion in this braita. On the other hand, we have a difficulty with his opinion, which you might have already thought about, which is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Kashya. The Eile, if it's really coming just to exclude a nida and not to separate between the first half of the verse and the second part of the verse, the Eile should have been at the end of the verse, because that means there's five things, the four lotas is the one positive, and then it should have said Eile lo, right? Eile lo yikach, or some sort of Eile should be at the end and not in the middle of the verse. That's actually a difficulty on his position. So again, what we did so far was to try to, first thing we dealt with today was im nasana, so I tried to understand the two different options. Does that mean if he married her, it's okay, meaning the marriage is good, but he has to divorce her, and then he just doesn't have to pay the knas for the mafute? Or does it mean he actually can stay married to her? Because in the end, in any case, she's going to end up having been slept by him, and therefore it's not such a big deal to keep her married, just like the mukaretz and the bogeret. So two approaches there. And again, we had two approaches here to understanding the machlokah between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the rabbis. Is it based on the machlokah Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis about whether panoya bala panoya, if a single woman has one relationship, one sexual encounter before marriage, does that make her a zonah or not? And that's why the kid would be a halal. Or, which we rejected that option, then we said, no, really, it's based on, is there a halal from chayve asa? Because this is forbidden only through a positive commandment. So therefore, it's not clear whether it would be a halal or not. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to a new topic, which is connected. This was all learned out from the word betula, right? Isha betula yikachu, right? And basically the kohen has to marry, a kohen gadol has to marry a betula. Where else does betula appear by kohanim? It's a very sore point in my family. And anyone else who comes from a house of kohanim, a woman, which is a bat kohen, okay, the daughter of a kohen. Her brother can only become impure to her when she dies, right? Which basically means going to the funeral, the burial, all that. Can only do that if she's a betula. Okay, once she gets married, okay, we're going to read the pasuk. Okay, I'll read it inside. Ula achoto habitula akrova elav asher lo hayta leish. There's a very long description here. We're going to darshan each part of that. Who is a kohen allowed to be metameh to when it comes to, right, his mother, father, brother? But when it comes to his sister, only his sister who's a betula, who's a virgin, hakrova elav, who's close to him, asher lo hayta leish, who is not with any other man, la yitama. Only to her can he become impure. So now that means he can't be, right? A kohen can't come near dead bodies in general, except for close family members, but not to, right, his sister, only if she's in this status. Now, first of all, it makes sense in terms of, we talked about this, right? Where the woman kind of leaves the husband, her own family, and moves into the husband's family and like kind of becomes part of their family, according to, right, the way their traditions worked. So she's no longer really part of his family anymore. So that's why he can't become impure to her. But that's the way they view it. Having only 3 brothers, right, it's a little bit difficult for me to swallow this halacha. Okay, so achoto arusa. So now the question is, what if she's betrothed? Okay, see, that's what you were wondering. So what if she's betrothed? Right, we're going to have a whole list. We're going to have a machloket between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda on one hand, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon on the other. Although if you look at the chart, I split Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehoshua because Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, because there's one issue that they disagree about. And you'll see here from the chart, there's 2 issues they all agree about, and there's 2 issues they disagree about. One is a machloket between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda against Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, and the other is a machloket between Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi against Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so there's all different permutations here. So achuto arusa, if she's betrothed, and then she's not exactly right, she's still kind of part of her family, but she's also designated to this guy. So Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, mitamela, they can be impure to this woman. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, mitamela, they can't be anymore. Anusam ufuta, we're basically going through all the categories we discussed by the kohen gadol. Anusam ufuta, divrei hakol mitamela. If she was raped or seduced, no, she's not a betula anymore. That's very clear. He can't be metamela, even though she's not married to anyone. Mukat eitz, very fascinating. A metamela. Again, her Torah hymen in some accident or some other way, she's not a betula anymore. He can't become tameh, even though it seems antithetical, right? The whole idea is whose family is she part of? Seems a little strange. Divrei Rabbi Shimon. Oh, but no, this is only Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Why does Rabbi Shimon say this? Shaya Rabbi Shimon omer. He's going to say the definitions are 100% the same as the kohen gadol. So even though maybe it doesn't make sense here, betula, there it's betula, here it's betula, but no one else agrees with him. He's got a unique opinion here. Everyone else thinks of mukat eitz. Of course, he can be metamela. Ubogeret. What about a bogeret? Right. So the kohen gadol couldn't. Well, metamela divrei kol adam. Everybody thinks the bogeret can be, even though the kohen gadol not, so it's a little bit tricky. But everyone seems to agree with the bogeret. Remember, we saw also there were different opinions about a kohen gadol, whether he could only marry a bogeret or not. This we'll see in tomorrow's daf as well. Anyway, everyone agrees a bogeret who's not married, who's still a betula, is allowed, right? Not betrothed, not anything, is her brother's allowed to be metamela. So again, let's just review, and the chart's very helpful. Anusam mifuta, everyone agrees, no way. Bogeret, everybody agrees, yes. Mukat eitz, most people think yes, he can be metamela. Only Rabbi Shimon, who says we hold the exact same definitions as kohen gadol, says no. And achuta urusa, we have this debate between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, who say yes, he can be, and Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yossi, who say no. Soon we're going to see how they get this all from the verses. So my time to Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. So now we're going to start with them, and there's a long chart about this. Okay. Yeah. I see you're asking the question, who's checking about whether their hymens are torn? That's a very good question. It's not clear that anyone's checking. Although if you want to talk about checking, wait till the end of the daf, where we're going to see some very strange checks they did on women to see about these things. So hold off on that. Okay. My time de Rabbi Meir Rabbi Yehuda. They darshan like this. Ula achoto habetula. Okay. So now we're going to start darshaning that whole pasuk. Your sister who is a betula. Okay. So that clearly comes to say not if you were seduced or raped. You might have thought I can exclude them as well. Talmud lamar asher lo hayta leish. It says who was not with any other man, which seems to make it clear that it's the man that's the issue and not getting hit by a stick. Misha vayato al yedei ish yatzazo she'ena vayato al yedei ish. Right? In other words, only one who became not a betula because of a man and not because of something else. Hakrova. Now we have all of a sudden, right? If she's close to you, that would seem to include another woman who would be close to you. That was their opinion. One who's betrothed is still close to her family because she's still living with them. So that's going to be on the side of, yes, you can be. Elav, right? Krova, elav, to him, you could just say hakrova. Why does it have to say elav? That comes to include another woman, lirabot haboger. Teach you also a boger. Remember, that's someone who's above 12 and a half. Ha lama likra. Okay, so now we're going to start with a question on the last one. Why do you even need a pasuk for bogeret? Why wouldn't you need a pasuk? Well, ha'amar Rabbi Meir, betula afilu miktzat betula mashu. If you remember Rabbi Meir, we had this drasha. Rabbi Meir says betula, we had the betula and then bivtuleha, right? If you had just had betula, it would have meant afilu miktzat betula mashu. Even if you're just partially a virgin, which means even if you're right, you grow up, and as you grow up, your body starts to change somewhat, and you're not exactly considered a betula like you were before. Well, betula seems to indicate even that would still be a betula, as long as you have some part, right? Then he darshan bivtula comes to exclude that. But in the beginning, he said the word betula, which is the word that appears in our verse, sounds even if you're a little bit of a betula, meaning even a bogeret, as long as you haven't had relations. So you wouldn't need a special drasha to teach that. Just by the word betula, it would have indicated that. So they say, no, it's true. You would have needed it. Why? Because you might have just said, well, betula appears here, betula appears by the kohen gadol. We're going to learn the exact same thing. Now there, we said bogeret is not allowed to marry the kohen gadol. So mala hala na'ara afkan nami na'ara. You might have thought there you need a na'ara. Therefore, also here you need a na'ara. Kamashmalan. That's why we need a drasha. So even though Rabbi Meir agreed that the word betula normally indicates even a bogeret, but since by the kohen gadol it says bivtula, we exclude the bogeret. So therefore, you would have thought maybe here we excluded as well because you would learn the halachot to be exactly the same. That's why we need the trust saying, no, it's not the same. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon. So that was all the drashot of Rabbi Meir. Now we're going to go Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon. It's going to be a bit of a strange order. They're going to darshan the pasuk in the exact same order that we darshan that the pasuk goes. But then they're going to start raising questions in a bit of a different order on different parts. So we're going to go a little forward, then backwards, okay, on different parts of this bride. So Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, my timeline. So darshehach, this is how they darshed. La'achoto ha'betula, prat lanusa umufuta umukat eitz. Okay, this, by the way, does not refer to, right? This is specifically Rabbi Shimon, who said mukat eitz can't. Okay, it's not Rabbi Yossi. Later we'll get back to this. But achoto ha'betula, virgin comes to exclude anyone who had relations or had their hymen torn for some other reason. Asher lo haita. Now, haita last time we said was to not exclude the mukat eitz. In this case, we say, what's it coming to exclude? Can't exclude the mukat eitz because we already, right? It's already, right? Sorry, it can't include the mukat eitz because mukat eitz is excluded according to this. Asher lo haita prala anu arusa. Lo haita leish means she wasn't married to a man, but if she was only engaged to him, betrothed, he'd be allowed to, right? Because remember, that comes to say, sorry, just 1 second. No, sorry. Prat la arusa, sorry. Asher lo haita leish would come to exclude the arusa, that the arusa, sorry, right, arusa ein metameh, right? They couldn't. Prat la arusa comes to exclude. He can't become tameh to the arusa because she was haita leish, right? She had kiddushin with someone. So that's excluding the arusa. Hakrova. But what about one who's close? That has to include something. Now, according to the first opinion, that included the arusa. He excludes the arusa. So, akrova lerabot arusa shenitgarsha. If she got divorced from engagement, divorced from marriage, no, she's already gone. But divorced from engagement, that could be. Okay, if she's divorced from engagement, then he can already go back and be impure to her. Elav, what does that include? This is the one thing they agree about, lerabot tabogeh. Okay, to include the bogeh. So now we're going to start with this drasha about the arusa shenitgarsha. I told you we're going in a bit of a different order. Hakrova, lerabot arusa shenitgarsha. So now they say, V'hama Rabbi Shimon, ruya lekohen gadol metamela, she'ein ruya lekohen gadol ein metamela. So wait a minute. How could you say arusa shenitgarsha? What's an arusa shenitgarsha? What's her status in halacha? She's a divorcee. Even though she was only betrothed, she's a divorcee. She can't marry a kohen gadol. Now, what did we say? Rabbi Shimon said, anyone who can marry a kohen gadol, he can be metamela. Anyone who can't marry a kohen gadol, he can't be. In arusa that got divorced, for sure can't marry a kohen gadol. She's a divorcee. So how could you possibly say that? So they say, Shanei hatam de Rabbi Rachmana krova. The word krova comes to say there's one exception to the rule. So now they're going to ask the obvious question. If you're already giving exceptions to the rule, right? Rabbi Shimon said, across the board, we're going to say whatever's true for a kohen gadol, except for that. Well, ihachi mukaretz nami. Right? Well, then why don't you say also mukaretz? That would be obvious to say the brother can be mitami to his sister who tore her hymen in some accident, right? What's the connection? So why don't you exclude that one as well? So they say krova, and we had this the other day, achat v'lo shtayim. It only includes one woman, and we're going to include that woman. So now the obvious question, why this and not that, right? Umara'ita, why are you going to include the arusa that got divorced and not include the mukaretz? So, hay David b'maseh, halo David b'maseh. Nothing physical transpired to the woman who was engaged and then divorced, right? Nothing physical happened to her body. So therefore, we're going to call her still a betula. But the woman who had her hymen torn, something happened to her. She changed, and therefore we're going to exclude her. It was very similar to something we saw the other day. The Rabbi Yossi. Now we have to deal with this split between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon in the mukaretz case. So mideshavke lebarzuge, since he left Rabbi Shimon on that issue, right? He differed with him on that issue. So michlal de b'mukaretz ki Rabbi Meir sfirale. Well, now we have to redo the drasha according to him. He must think that the mukaretz we derive from what words? Remember, asher lo hayta leish. The only issue is because she was with a person. She wasn't with any person, but she lost her virginity with, she didn't really lose her virginity. She tore her hymen from some accident. That's excluded from this verse, and that's what he's going to learn it from. But what's the problem? So here, let's read minale mi lo hayta leish. But the lo hayta leish, he used to exclude the arusa, who was already with a man, right? She was engaged. That already excludes her. The brother can't be matami. So, chad mi lo hayta v'chad leish. We're going to say, lo hayta comes to exclude the arusa, because she was hayta. Remember, often the lashon of havaya refers to kiddushin. So she was far hayta leish, and that's where she's excluded from. Leish comes to exclude a person and not from a piece of wood, okay, or from some sort of accident. Now going on in their drashot and questions on their drashot, we're now going to the last one. Elav lerabot habogeret. Now, what's the problem with this? You can obviously figure this out. Rabbi Shimon betula shlema mashma. Rabbi Shimon said a betula, normally just the word betula means a betula shlema, complete betula, right? Then he had said, right, but betula comes to exclude the bogeret. But when he said betula, this is the opposite of Rabbi Meir in the previous. Betula means a complete betula, which means a bogeret would not be included in this, right? So now, if that's the case, a bogeret is not, according to betula, you would need a complete betula, and this is a bogeret, she's not a complete betula. According to him, a betula shouldn't be part of someone a kohen can be metame to her, and yet it says lerabot bogeret. Supposed to, with Rabbi Meir, we said it was obvious this was the case. Why do we need to say it? Here it's the opposite of what we would have said. So tama didei nami mehachi, didarish hachi. If you just had the word betula, we would have excluded the bogeret. But since it says elav, it's coming to include something that would have been included, but right, would have been excluded, but it's not. Elav comes to say even a bogeret he can be impure to. So again, that's the whole reason there's a drasha, because the simple reading wouldn't have said that. that's the end of this sugya. This was all to get to, again, what we did so far today. First, we analyzed these two opinions. Again, at the very beginning, I'm going to leave that aside, but then we analyzed these two opinions, Rabbi Eliezer and Yaakov with the rabbis, whether the blood is a halal from an usat chavero or mufutat chavero. Then we took this concept of who can marry a kohen gadol, the betula mentioned there, and we took the betula mentioned by a regular kohen to which sister can he be metameh to? What's the status of sister? She has to be a betula. But it had all these other wording in the verse, which seemed right. So from all those different wordings, we got to 2 to 3 different approaches about in which case can he be impure to his sister, in which case can he be, and we basically showed all the drashot that got to the different opinions. Now we're going to move on to a different topic. We're going to learn this big kula. Okay, you might say big, might not big. I don't know how many cases it involves, but it definitely is a relevant sugya, which is, notice in the Torah, it never said that a kohen can't marry a giyoret, a convert. But we know this to be the case. A kohen's not allowed to marry a convert. Where does that come from? Well, there's a concern that a convert, we assume she must have had relations before converted, and therefore he can't marry her because she falls into the category of a zonah. So now we're going to see at what age, though, and this all goes back to our age of 3 and a day, a woman is ru'uya l'biyah. So comes Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and he says, Tanya Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai omer, giyoret pchutami bat 3 shanim biyom echad k'sheira l'kehuna. She converted before age 3, she can marry a kohen, okay? Because we assume she's not ru'uya l'biyah. So now the question is, okay, where does he get this from? And the rabbis disagree, by the way. They think a convert from birth is a problem. Okay, this is a very big, important sugya and very relevant to convert at a very young age, which is common, right? A family converts and they convert their children. Are they considered converts that can't marry kohanim? So according to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, it's allowed. We're going to see a big debate. Do we hold like him? Do we not hold like him in the Gemara? I'm not getting into practical halacha l'maseh, but this is the sugya. So now, he says she can. Shenema, the kol hataf b'nashim asher lo yad'u mishkav zachar hachayu lachem. Here's his proof. In the battle of the Midianites and in Sefer Bamidbar, it says all the young women that didn't, right, taf b'nashim are the children, that didn't know mishkav zachar, meaning they never have relations with anyone, you can keep them alive. V'harei Pinchas imahem, what does he say? Well, Pinchas was among them. He was a kohen. And the idea is, keep them alive because you can marry them, even though they're, right, if you convert them, you can marry them. So here you see, even the Kohanim could have. Again, it's not the clearest proof who's to say the Kohanim could have married them, right? Just because Pinchas was there, but they assume because Pinchas was there, that it means Kohanim included as well. That's Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. The Rabbanit who disagree, what did they say? Why did they keep them alive? Lavadim l'shvachot. They kept them alive to be their servants, not to marry them and convert them and marry them. So then they say, Ihachi, if that's the case. So now, where do we get to, right? Bat 3 shanim b'yom echad nami. If they kept them alive, right, where do you get to this age thing of 3 and a day? So they say, Kid Rav Huna. The Rav Huna Rami, Rav Huna raised a contradiction from 2 verses in the section. K'tiv, it says, Kol isha yodat ish l'mishkav zachar harog. Okay, it said there, any woman who knew a man, who had been in relations with a man, harogu, kill. Ha'ena yodat, if she hadn't had relations yet, kimu. Michlal, now from here it says isha, which means a full-grown woman. We're going to basically say, if she had relations, she dies. If she didn't, we keep her alive, right? This was in the battle. They were supposed to kill the people in the battle. But who were they supposed to kill? Only women who would have relations. Notice children are excluded from that. So it seems to indicate children, right? Whether they have relations, whether they didn't have relations, you can keep them alive. Uchtiv. It also says, but now here's the contradictory pasuk. Any young women, meaning children, who had never been with anyone, you can keep alive. Now that seems to imply the opposite of what we just said. Hayade, if they have been with men, harogu. So one pasuk indicates it's only women we have to kill. Children you keep alive no matter what. The second pasuk indicates children you can only keep alive if they haven't been with a man. Heve omer. So how do you resolve this contradiction? It's all about kol hataf b'nashim, who you can keep alive if they lo yad'u. That means they were underage. And kol isha is they were of age that they could have had relations already, which is going to be our 3 in a day. So therefore, the pasuk that talks about the isha, we're going to assume is older, right? It all depends. And then it really doesn't depend whether you did or whether you didn't. It depends on whether you were potentially capable of having had relations versus not potentially capable of having relations. And that's a proof for Rabbi Shimon by Yochai. Tanya Namihachi, there's a brighter to support this reading of the verses. And it doesn't really explain much. It just says, this is how we read the verses. V'chol isha yodat ish biruya laba'el hakatum medaber. Okay, kol isha yodat ish means she potentially could have, meaning she was over the age of 3. How do you know that, right? Maybe it means she actually had relations, like the simple reading. Because of the contradiction of the verse, that's where you get that it's potentially. No, I skipped. Minayade. Okay, here's the question that people were asking before. And the other thing, now they're asking here. How did they know? How did they know? Now, here the question is not how did they know if they have relations or not. How did they know how old these women were, right? These babies, right? Okay, it's very hard to tell people's ages, right? How they know who was 3 and who wasn't. They didn't check everyone's birth certificates and say, okay, let's see who's what age and then know where the cutoff age. So apparently they had some miraculous, or maybe a little less miraculous, we'll see, type of way of figuring it out. They passed them in front of the tzitz. The tzitz was this head plate the kohen gadol would wear that would help determine all sorts of things that we didn't know about. So they would put them in front of the tzitz. Now, when they passed them in front of the tzitz, okay, with the kohen gadol wearing it, kosha panea morikot, if her face went sallow, which means turned yellowish brownish, then biyadua she'ruya liba'el, and you would know that she was of age. Kosha ein panea morikot biyadua she'ein ruya liba'el. Some of this would make some miraculous effect on those people and not those people, and that's how they knew. Amarav Nachman simam ma'avera hidrok. Hidrok kind of was a disease. Some people think it's from the intestines. There was some disease that would maybe make your face turn yellowish, brownish, and that was a siman for sin. Now here it's a little tricky because they're confusing, but their basic assumption was once they were 3, they clearly must have had relations with somebody, which is a little bit weird to understand. But again, if you live in times where, and the enemies at the time, there was a lot of sexual things going on, and it really could be that women were often raped at that age. It's really hard to know, but it could be that that this would actually, be a siman. In other words, here they're saying that they actually had engaged in sin, and then they believed that hidrokan was a sign for sin. Okay, the hidrokan would often make your belly swell. It's kind of similar to the sota, but apparently would also make your face turn brownish, and that would also be an indicator. Okay, if you didn't think this was strange, it's going to be even stranger. In the Pilegish B'Giv'ah, in the story at the end of Sefer Shoftim, when they kill out right after they chopped up this woman, so there was a civil war between the Binyamin, Shevet Binyamin, the tribe of Benjamin, and everyone else, and they killed many of the people. And then they found this one city that hadn't been part of it, and they end up the Yoshvei Gilad. What happened was then they started to get worried that no one was going to marry anyone in Binyamin, and Binyamin would be wiped out entirely, which they didn't want to happen either. So then they found these people who weren't part of they hadn't come with the rest of the nation to fight. So they decided we have to kill all these people, but we're going to keep alive the betulot in the city. Okay, so anyone who was a virgin we'll keep alive, and then we'll have them marry the Binyamin people, and then we'll resolve a bunch of issues. So they found 400 virgins who had never slept with a man before. So the obvious question, and this is why we're bringing it, because we're showing how did they determine these things? Okay, this is a little bit strange, or a lot strange. They put them on top of a barrel of wine with no clothes underneath, no undergarments. Now the assumption was if you had relations, it was wider, which means the wine could go into your body much easier, which means it would then come out through your mouth, the smell of the wine. So if they would smell her breath, if you could smell it, then you would know that she had had relations. It's a very strange way to test this. Betula ein rechanodef. Okay, if she was a virgin, you wouldn't be able to smell anything because it was kind of blocked underneath there. So the smell of the wine couldn't go up through her body. Again, I don't think this is a real test, but they use this apparently according to this as a test. And then the Gemara asks an obvious question. Like, this is a very strange way to do it. Why don't you just not renew lifnei tzitz? Put them before the tzitz. Now remember, if they're virgins, they get to live. So they get killed with the people of Yabesh Gilead. So Amar Rav Kana Bereid Rav Natan L'Ratzon Lahem Tiv L'Ratzon V'Lo L'Poranut. The tzitz was used L'Ratzon Lahem, to be for good things. It's not used for bad things. Usually it atoned for sins like a tumah that was done by accident. If someone worshipped in the temple and they were impure or something, it would atone for sins. It's not supposed to come to determine are you going to die. So they say, well, they used it in Midyan for that purpose. So they say, for Jews, it's only helpful. For non-Jews, it could even be for bad things. Very strange section. But what I like about it is they address the question we were wondering, which is how would you be able to determine such a thing, right? It might be their answer was a little bit strange, but at least they do have this question of how on earth are we supposed to figure this out? Now the question is, do we hold like Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai or not? Rabbi Yaakov, I see you're saying was to marry the Binyamites, but anyone who wouldn't would be killed. So that's the Puranut. Okay, Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, Rabbi Shimon ben Levi. He says in the name of Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Levi, Halakha Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. So Amar le Rabbi Zera le Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, befavor shmialach or michlal shmialach. This is a question they like to ask. Did you learn this? Did he say it explicitly, or did you infer it from some psak he had somewhere else? So what does he say? My klala. What? So first, before he even answers the question, they say, "What's the klala? Where could you have learned it from if you derived it from some story?" The Amar Rabbi Shimon Levi, there was a city that there was some rumors that there was some improper relationship there. The Shigir Rebbe Rabbi Romanus Ubadkai sent his rabbi Rabbi Romanus to check the situation. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi tells this story. The Rabbi Romanus found out there was a convert who had converted under the age of 3, married to a kohen, and Rebbe said, "Oh, that's not a problem." So what do you see here? It sounds like you can infer from there that Rabbi Shimon ben Levi holds like Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai because he says Rebbe allowed this. Amalei, so that was where we could have learned to be klala. And now we go back to the story. They asked Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, did you learn it miklala, or did he say it explicitly? So Amalei befavor shmiali, I heard it explicitly. So then they say, what if he had heard it from the story? Could you have inferred this? So he says, well, this is why. This is the issue. You could have distinguished between the cases. She was already married to him, so we let her stay, but not necessarily that she could do it lechatchila. Now we go back to where we started today. The right? So now they say, right, there he said, you could stay married. So that's why maybe we let her stay married. But if it's lechatchila, we might not allow it. So then they say, you can't compare the cases. Or question. The only reason they were allowed to stay married before was because if she was too old, well, eventually she'll be older when she married him. And if she was a mukad eitz, eventually her hymen will tear with him. So what's the difference? She could stay married. But here you're going to say, oh, well, in any case, she will have slept with someone else while she's married to him. No. In the end, she's a zonah, so we shouldn't allow this anyway. Rav Safra, matnila michlala. He learned it out, not the Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, not like Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, he heard it explicitly, but he learned it out from this story. And then kashele umashane lehach. And they asked the question, and then he answered it like they did just before. We're going to end with this one story about this. We're going to see how strong people felt about this. Okay, so there was a kohen who did this. He married this woman. Rabbi Shimon Yochai would have permitted this, right? And so would, according to what we said, Rabbi Shimon Levi and Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, right? Who said in their name. So Amalei Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, my high. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, what's going on here? How could he have done this? Amalei. They said to him, Amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, Amar Rabbi Shimon Levi, Alachat Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. We're going by the Psak Halakha that we learned from him. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak got very upset, and he said, Amalei, Zil Apik. He has to divorce her right now. Ve'ilo mafikna lach Yaakov bar Idi miunach. I'm going to take Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi out of your ears, meaning you will never hear from him again, meaning you will not ever hold by him. Okay. In other words, I don't go by what Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi says, and no way, no how could she marry. So you see, he felt very, very strongly about this psikah. So we see these two approaches, and tomorrow we're going to see a different lenient opinion of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. We don't always view him as a lenient kind of person, and here we see some lenient opinions of his. We'll end here for today. and Shabbat Shalom.